Hey everyone, welcome back to Minute 60. Tonight I've got 6 terrifying true Uber horror stories that will make you think twice before getting into a ride at night. So grab a blanket, dim the lights, and settle in, because once we start, you'll want to keep listening all the way through. If you're new here, this is the channel where we share creepy, true scary stories that are perfect for late nights and sleepless hours. Before we dive in, I want to know, where are you listening from tonight? Drop your state, city, or even your country in the comments. It's always awesome to see this creepy little community stretch across the US and the world. And hey, if you love scary stories, make sure you hit subscribe and tap the bell, because we've got new nightmares for you every single day. All right, let's get into it. It was just past midnight when Tom, an Uber driver with years of experience, glanced at his phone and saw a new ride request ping on the screen. The address was in a quiet suburban neighborhood he barely knew, a place where streetlights flickered and most houses seemed abandoned at this hour. He hesitated for a moment, stretching his tired arms, then swiped to accept. The streets were unusually silent. No cars passed in either direction, and the occasional barking of a dog echoed through the empty blocks. The kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes every small sound feel amplified. Tom adjusted the rearview mirror, noticing how the dim dashboard lights reflected against the windshield like little glowing eyes. Minutes later, he pulled up to the pickup location. A single streetlight flickered above the sidewalk, casting shifting shadows that made the houses around him look like abandoned stage sets. That's when he saw him. A young man, maybe in his early 20s, standing perfectly still under the streetlight, staring at the ground as if he knew Tom was coming. Tom rolled down the window, offering a tired smile. "Evening? You headed somewhere?" The young man looked up slowly, and that's when Tom noticed something strange. There was a familiarity in the way he held himself, something unsettlingly calm, almost too composed for someone waiting in the middle of the night. Without a word, the passenger opened the back door and slid inside, carrying with him the faint scent of wet soil and something else Tom couldn't identify, something metallic. Tom swallowed nervously and tapped the GPS. "Where to?" he asked, expecting the usual address. The passenger's voice was low, almost a whisper. "Just follow me." And with that, they pulled onto the empty streets, the hum of the engine filling the silence. Tom couldn't shake the feeling that something about this ride wasn't right, but he shrugged it off. After all, he had driven enough late-night strangers to know that nerves often played tricks on a tired mind. But as the car slid further into the darkness and the houses thinned out into shadows and empty lots, that uneasy feeling only grew. The car hummed along the empty streets, and Tom tried to make conversation, though his voice sounded louder than usual in the quiet night. "So, you work around here?" he asked, stealing glances at the rearview mirror. The passenger didn't answer at first. He just stared straight ahead, his eyes reflecting the dim streetlights like tiny, cold stars. When he finally spoke, his voice was almost melodic, yet chilling. "Not really. I go where I need." Tom shifted uncomfortably in his seat, feeling a prickling sensation crawl up the back of his neck. Something about the calmness in that voice was wrong. He tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the passing houses, the way the shadows bent strangely around the trees and lampposts. Then Tom noticed it, subtle at first, a movement in the rearview mirror that didn't match the passenger's still body. For a split second, he thought he saw the young man lean forward, closer than possible, though when Tom blinked, he was sitting upright again, perfectly still. A cold shiver ran through him. He adjusted the mirror, telling himself it must be a trick of the light, his tired mind playing games. Yet every few minutes, that flicker returned, a shadow that moved when it shouldn't, A faint breathing he wasn't sure came from the passenger or somewhere else entirely. The road began to narrow, lined by overgrown hedges and empty lots. Tom checked the GPS. It was still pointing toward a neighborhood far off the main street, but the passenger's calm instructions overrode it. "Turn here," he said softly, pointing toward a side street that led deeper into darkness. Tom hesitated. The street was almost deserted, the kind of place you drive through once and never come back. But something in the passenger's voice, calm yet insistent, made him comply. He turned. As the engine whispered down the narrow road, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't just driving through a quiet neighborhood anymore. He was moving through a space that existed somewhere between reality and something else. Every rustle of leaves, every flicker of a streetlight felt magnified, like the night itself was watching. And through it all, the passenger remained unnervingly still, staring straight ahead, as if he already knew exactly where they were going, and why. Tom's hands tightened on the steering wheel as the street narrowed even further. The houses had disappeared completely, replaced by dark, overgrown fields and scattered, skeletal trees that scratched against the night sky. He tried to shake off the uneasy feeling, telling himself he was just tired. But then it happened. A sudden movement in the rearview mirror made his stomach flip. For a heartbeat, he saw the passenger's head tilt, slightly, unnaturally, in a way that no human neck should be able to twist. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and the figure was upright again, perfectly still, staring forward like nothing had happened. Tom's heart started pounding. "You okay back there?" he asked, his voice shaking. The passenger didn't answer. He didn't even flinch. But then a faint, almost imperceptible whisper drifted from the back seat, barely audible over the hum of the tires. Tom froze. "Did you just—" he stammered, looking in the mirror again. The back seat was empty. Not partially empty, completely empty. The young man was gone. His pulse spiked. "This has to be some kind of joke," he muttered, glancing at the passenger seat. Empty. The front seat? Empty. The seatbelt indicator still showed someone was buckled in, but there was nothing. The phone buzzed suddenly, startling him. He checked the app, ride still in progress. The pickup location? Correct. The drop-off? The GPS still led him somewhere remote, but nothing in the app explained what had just happened. A chill ran down his spine. He glanced in the rearview mirror one more time. For just a second, he thought he saw a shadowy figure sitting upright, pale and still, staring back at him with eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. Then it was gone. Tom's breathing became shallow. He wanted to stop the car, to pull over, to run, anything, but something kept him moving. He didn't know why, and he didn't want to know. Somewhere deep inside, he knew the ride wasn't over. Not yet. Tom's hands shook on the steering wheel. Every instinct screamed at him to stop, to turn around, to get out of the car, but the GPS still insisted they were en route. The night outside had thickened into something almost tangible, the darkness pressing against the windshield like a living thing. Then it happened. A faint, wet sound from the back seat. At first, he thought it was rain dripping onto the leather, but the car was dry. The sound grew louder, almost like breathing, shallow and deliberate. Tom swallowed hard and slowly glanced into the rearview mirror. There it was again, a shadow, hunched slightly, moving impossibly in the back seat. Tom froze, gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The figure didn't speak. It didn't blink. It just waited. "Who? What do you want?" Tom whispered, his voice cracking. The shadow shifted slightly, and for a fraction of a second he could have sworn he saw a smile, wrong, unnatural, stretching too wide across a face that shouldn't exist. Then it was gone, leaving only darkness and the faint metallic scent lingering in the air. Tom's mind raced. He pressed the brakes slightly, heart hammering. The car slowed, but the shadow didn't react. Then the phone buzzed again, the Uber app still showing the ride in progress, and a message had appeared in the chat. "Almost there. Don't look back." Every hair on Tom's body stood on end. He dared a glance over his shoulder into the empty back seat. Nothing. Not a sound, not a movement. Yet he could still feel the presence behind him, the unmistakable weight of something not human. The road twisted sharply ahead, trees arching overhead like skeletal arms. Tom's pulse raced as he realized he wasn't in control anymore. He was just moving towards something he didn't understand, guided by a passenger that didn't exist. Tom's knuckles were still white from gripping the wheel, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. The GPS continued its silent insistence, but he realized the route it was showing no longer resembled any streets he knew. The familiar neighborhoods had vanished, replaced by long stretches of overgrown fields, broken fences, and gnarled trees leaning over the road. Suddenly the passenger spoke again, his voice soft, almost hypnotic. "Keep going, almost there." Tom's stomach turned. "Almost where?" he whispered, but the voice didn't answer. He glanced in the rear-view mirror again, half expecting to see the empty seat, but there it was, that pale, shadowy figure, sitting upright, eyes glinting faintly in the dim dashboard light. The road curved sharply and the car jolted slightly over a pothole. Tom's heart skipped a beat as he realized the shadow seemed to move independently, leaning closer to him now. He swerved slightly, almost losing control. "Stop! I need to stop!" he shouted, panic rising in his throat. But the car didn't obey him. It felt guided, as if some invisible hand had taken over the wheel. The metal scent from earlier intensified, thick and suffocating, filling the cabin with a metallic tang that made Tom gag. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw movement, figures in the fields beside the road, just vague silhouettes, humanoid but distorted, watching silently as he drove past. Every instinct screamed at him to turn around, but no matter how fast he tried to maneuver, the road seemed endless, stretching further into darkness. Tom's hands shook, his vision narrowing as adrenaline surged. He realized the ride was no longer taking him somewhere familiar. It was taking him somewhere else, somewhere unknown. Tom's hands were trembling so badly he could barely hold the wheel. The darkness outside pressed in like a living weight, and the strange metallic scent in the car was almost suffocating now. Every instinct screamed at him to stop the car, to jump out, to run, but he felt rooted to the driver's seat, trapped. Then it happened. From the back seat, a low, wet sound filled the cabin, a sort of scraping, like nails on metal, slow and deliberate. Tom's eyes shot to the rearview mirror. The shadow that had haunted the seat all along now seemed closer, larger, its vague human shape distorting, shifting unnaturally as though it was stretching toward him. "Stop this car!" Tom yelled, panic in every word. The voice from the passenger seat, or wherever it was, responded with that same calm, chilling whisper. "Not yet." Almost there. The car jerked slightly, as if obeying a force outside Tom's control. Outside, the fields were no longer just dark silhouettes. They moved. Shapes emerged, humanoid but grotesque, crawling and slithering through the grass, surrounding the road. Tom blinked, unable to believe what he was seeing. The headlights barely illuminated the figures, but he could feel them, watching, waiting, beckoning. He turned his head quickly to glance at the passenger seat. Empty. Again. The seatbelt indicator still showed someone buckled in. And then, in the mirror, he saw it, a pale, featureless face hovering just above the back seat, smiling in a way that made his stomach churn. Its eyes were dark voids, endless and bottomless, staring straight into his soul. Tom's heart pounded so violently he thought it might burst. He slammed on the brakes. The car skidded on the uneven road, throwing him forward. And for a terrifying moment, everything froze. The shadow, the figures outside, even the engine, the world held its breath. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the presence receded, leaving only the faint scent of metal, the eerie silence, and the car slowly rolling forward on its own, guided by something unseen. Tom sat there, chest heaving, hands gripping the wheel as if holding on for dear life. He realized the ride wasn't just strange anymore, it was alive, malevolent, and there was no turning back. Tom's knuckles ached from gripping the wheel, his pulse hammering in his ears. The road ahead had grown twisted and unfamiliar, no longer resembling anything on the GPS or in his memory. Trees arched overhead like skeletal fingers, and the field shadows beyond the road seemed to shift, moving closer with every flicker of his headlights. Then he felt it, a subtle pressure on his shoulder, as if someone had leaned in from the back seat. He spun around. Empty. The back seat was still vacant, yet the metallic tang lingered stronger than ever, thick in the air. A whisper slithered past his ear, slow, deliberate, almost there. Almost. Tom froze. The words weren't coming from his phone, nor from the car speakers. They were inside the car, inside his head. The sensation of being watched intensified. Shapes emerged again in the fields, closer this time, humanoid silhouettes crawling and slithering through the tall grass, moving in ways that no human body could. Panic surged through him. He slammed the brakes again, but the car didn't respond fully. It lurched forward on its own, tires squealing against the uneven road. Every instinct screamed at him to jump out, but the fear rooted him in place, his eyes locked on the rearview mirror. And then he saw it. Not just a shadow this time, but a figure, pale, featureless, impossibly tall, standing upright in the back seat, looking directly at him. Its empty eyes drilled into his, and its smile stretched wider than any human face could. It leaned forward slightly, and for a moment Tom felt his mind slip, like he was being pulled toward the void behind the seat. He jerked the wheel, swerving violently. The car skidded off the narrow road, barely missing the grotesque silhouettes in the field. Yet no matter how fast he turned, the road seemed endless, looping back on itself, as if the night itself refused to let him escape. Tom realized with a cold, sinking horror that this ride had no destination except deeper into the unknown, guided by something that was not human and not bound by the laws of reality. Tom's chest burned with panic, every nerve screaming at him to stop the car, to escape, to do anything. But his body felt frozen, trapped in a nightmare he couldn't wake from. The trees overhead seemed to bend closer, their skeletal branches clawing at the windshield as if the night itself were alive. Then the whisper came again, louder this time, sharper. "Look at me." Tom's gaze snapped to the rearview mirror. The shadow, no, the figure, was there, sitting upright, impossibly tall, its pale, featureless face now perfectly visible. The smile was wrong, stretched wide beyond reason, and its hollow eyes bored into his soul. For the first time, he could feel it, not just see it. A weight pressed down on him, a suffocating presence that made his vision blur, and his heart pound so violently he thought it might stop. He tried to turn the wheel, but the car lurched forward as if it had a mind of its own. Then came the sound, a low, guttural hum, vibrating through the seats, the dashboard, even through Tom's chest. The field outside seemed to move in rhythm with it, the humanoid silhouettes pressing closer, crawling over each other in impossible ways, their dark shapes writhing like living shadows. Tom's fingers trembled as he reached for the passenger door, desperate to open it, to jump out. But it wouldn't budge, not a centimetre. The lock clicked ominously, refusing him freedom. And then, with a sudden, almost playful tilt of its head, the figure in the rearview mirror winked. Just a flicker, but enough to send Tom's mind spiralling. The world outside seemed to warp around him, the road stretching into endless darkness, the shadows leaning closer, waiting. For the first time he understood, this ride had no intention of ending anywhere he knew. He was no longer a driver, no longer in control. He was a passenger of something that didn't exist in the world he thought he lived in. Tom's vision was narrowing, the weight of the presence pressing down on him like a physical force. His pulse thundered in his ears, drowning out everything else, the whispering, the hum, even the faint rustle of the humanoid silhouettes in the fields. Then, without warning, the figure in the back seat shifted forward impossibly fast, tilting over the center console. Tom screamed, slamming both hands on the wheel, but the car stayed unnervingly smooth, as if nothing had moved at all. He stole a glance in the rearview mirror. The back seat was empty, completely empty. The seatbelt indicator still showed someone was buckled in. The metallic scent lingered. The hum vibrated through his chest. But there was no figure, no shadow, no pale smile. Tom's mind raced, his rational thoughts colliding with something he couldn't explain. Then his phone buzzed, a notification on the Uber app. Ride completed. Tom's hands shook violently. He glanced around, the road stretched endlessly before him, the fields still crawling with those shadowy humanoid figures, but the passenger, the terrifying presence, was gone, vanished as though it had never existed, leaving only the faint, metallic scent and the lingering echo of its whisper. Almost there. Next time. Tom's chest heaved, adrenaline coursing through him as he slowed the car to a trembling stop on the side of the road. His eyes scanned the darkness, half expecting the figure to reappear, to lean over him again. But the night was silent, empty, save for the rustling of the overgrown fields. For the first time he realized he was alone. Or at least, alone in this world. Tom sat in the car for what felt like hours, staring into the darkness, heart still hammering. The empty road stretched endlessly, the overgrown fields pressing in like silent witnesses. Every nerve in his body screamed at him that the ride wasn't over. Not really. Even though the passenger was gone, the memory of those hollow eyes and that impossibly wide smile clung to him like a shadow. The metallic scent lingered, faint but unmistakable. Every sound, the hum of the engine, the rustling of the wind through the trees, felt amplified, as if the night itself was watching. Tom finally started the car again, driving slowly back toward familiar streets, but every shadow on the side of the road made him flinch. He never picked up another late-night ride alone. Every time his phone buzzed with a new request, a cold dread crawled up his spine. Some nights he still swears he can feel that presence, sitting silently in the back seat, whispering faintly, reminding him, almost there. Next time. And with that terrifying thought lingering in the air, we move on to our next story. It starts like a typical night for a young woman, tired from work and ready to get home. She orders her Uber, expecting the usual, familiar app interface, predictable ride, friendly driver. But when the car pulls up, something feels off. The driver isn't listed, yet the car matches the app. His smile is too friendly, too knowing, and he seems to already know things about her life she hasn't shared. Little does she know this ride will be nothing like the one she expected, and by the time it's over, she'll be questioning whether any driver can ever be trusted again. It was just past midnight when Emily tapped the Uber app on her phone, exhausted from a long day at work. She double-checked the address, then waited on the sidewalk, her coat pulled tightly around her. The streets were quiet, almost unnervingly so. Streetlights flickered intermittently, casting uneven pools of yellow light on the pavement. Her phone buzzed and she looked up to see a car approaching. The make and colour matched the one listed in her app. She exhaled a small sigh of relief and waved. The vehicle slowed and stopped in front of her, the headlights cutting through the fog that had started to settle over the street. She opened the door, smiling tiredly, and slid into the back seat. The driver greeted her with a cheerful, almost too friendly tone. "Evening. Emily, right?" Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't told the app her name aloud. How did he know? She forced a laugh. "Yes, that's me." The driver smiled warmly, hands gripping the wheel. "Great, let's get you home." At first, the ride seemed normal, smooth, quiet, and uneventful. But as they drove, Emily noticed little things that didn't add up. The streets they were passing weren't the ones she knew, and the route they were taking twisted through dark, unfamiliar neighborhoods. The driver's questions were oddly personal, probing details about her day, her friends, and her home address in a way that felt invasive, almost rehearsed. Emily's unease grew, a slow, creeping knot tightening in her stomach. She tried to focus on the road ahead, telling herself she was being paranoid. After all, mistakes happen. Maybe the app matched her with the wrong driver. Maybe it was nothing. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. Emily sank deeper into the back seat, trying to convince herself it was just a misunderstanding. But the streets outside grew darker, the familiar city lights fading into shadows that seemed almost too thick to be real. The houses became sparse, windows dark, lawns overgrown, suburbs giving way to quiet, abandoned streets. The driver's voice cut through the silence, calm and unnervingly confident. "So you live alone?" he asked. Emily stiffened, gripping her phone. She hadn't mentioned anything like that. Yes, she replied cautiously. He nodded as if he already knew the answer. "It must get pretty quiet sometimes. Does it bother you?" Emily tried to laugh, but it came out hollow. "Not really, just quiet," she said, glancing at the GPS. The route didn't match the one the app suggested. Instead of heading straight home, the car twisted through back streets and empty alleys. A chill crawled up her spine. She tried to send a message to a friend, pretending to text casually, but her phone kept glitching, freezing for a split second each time. Every time she looked up, the driver's smile lingered, friendly yet piercing, almost as if he was reading her thoughts. The hum of the engine and the soft sound of tires on asphalt were the only noises, yet Emily felt a presence behind her, pressing close. She caught herself glancing at the empty seat next to her, half expecting something. Her pulse quickened. The ride that started like any other now felt like a trap, the quiet streets and too friendly driver wrapping around her like a net she couldn't escape. Emily's hands tightened around her phone as the car turned onto a long, empty street. The streetlights were few and far between, flickering weakly as if struggling to stay alive. Shadows stretched across the asphalt, twisting unnaturally in the glare of the headlights. The driver spoke again, his voice casual, too calm for the tension in the air. "Do you usually take rides alone at night?" Emily swallowed hard. I don't always have a choice," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. He nodded, leaning slightly toward the rearview mirror. "I see. You don't feel safe." Emily's stomach sank. The questions were harmless enough on the surface, but combined with the wrong route, the glitching phone, and the oppressive darkness outside, it all felt like a trap. She glanced at the rearview mirror again, heart skipping a beat. For a brief moment, she thought she saw a shadow shift in the back seat just behind her. She shook her head, telling herself she was imagining it, but every instinct screamed that she wasn't. Her pulse raced, and she realized she could barely think. Every turn the car made seemed deliberate, taking her further from the familiar and deeper into the unknown. Emily tried to open the door. Locked. She tried to text a friend again. Phone froze mid-message. She glanced up at the driver, whose smile had widened slightly, calm, unbothered, and impossibly knowing. Her breath caught. The streets around them were empty, but she could feel it, the awareness of being watched, guided, hunted. The ride had stopped being about getting home. It was about control. Emily pressed herself back into the seat, fighting the rising panic. She didn't know what this driver wanted, but she knew one thing. She had to survive the next few minutes. Whatever it took. Emily's chest tightened as the car continued down streets she didn't recognize. The familiar hum of traffic had vanished, replaced by an eerie silence that pressed against the car like a living thing. Every streetlight they passed flickered and died, leaving patches of darkness that seemed to move with the shadows outside. The driver spoke again, calm, measured, almost mocking. "You look nervous. Don't be. I'm just here to make sure you get home safely." Emily's hands trembled. I just want to go home," she whispered, trying not to meet his eyes in the rearview mirror. But she couldn't help it. His gaze seemed to stretch beyond the mirror, into her mind. The car slowed suddenly, rolling to a stop in the middle of an empty intersection. Emily glanced at the GPS. Nothing. The route had disappeared entirely, replaced by blank streets and dark outlines of buildings she'd never seen. Where are we?" she asked, voice quivering. The driver didn't answer at first. Then, with a smile that made her stomach churn, he said softly, almost a whisper, "Somewhere you weren't supposed to be." Emily's heart raced. The shadows outside shifted unnaturally. Shapes moved at the edges of her vision, too fast, too deliberate. She tried the door handle again, locked. Her phone buzzed, no message, just a blank screen, but the vibration felt like it came from the back seat. A sudden metallic scent filled the car, sharp and cold, making her gag. Her eyes flicked toward the empty passenger seat. For a split second she swore she saw the outline of a figure, pale, unmoving, and smiling. Then it was gone. Emily realized with rising dread that she wasn't just in the wrong car, she was somewhere else entirely, trapped with a driver who knew more about her than he should, and with forces she couldn't begin to understand closing in. Emily's hands gripped the seat, knuckles white. The car creaked as it rolled forward, the tires whispering over cracked asphalt. Every instinct screamed at her to get out, but the doors were still locked, her phone useless, and the driver's calm, knowing smile kept her frozen. Then she felt it, a sudden cold pressure on the back of her neck, like a hand resting there without touching her. She jerked forward, her eyes darting to the rearview mirror. Empty. The seat beside her remained vacant. The metallic scent intensified, sharp and choking. She gagged, pressing her face into the coat she had pulled around herself. Her heart hammered. Something about this ride was impossible, unnatural. The streets outside twisted and looped, unfamiliar and endless, leading her deeper into darkness rather than home. The driver's voice came again, casual, almost teasing. "Don't worry, you'll be safe, if you listen." Emily swallowed hard. "Safe? Safe from what?" she whispered, panic rising. He didn't answer, just kept driving, glancing at her occasionally in the mirror, his eyes impossibly calm, his smile widening just a fraction. She felt as if he knew her every thought, every fear. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw movement in the shadows outside, figures standing at the edges of the streets, humanoid but wrong, their forms bending and stretching unnaturally. Every time she tried to look directly, they vanished, replaced by the stillness of abandoned houses and broken streetlights. Emily's breath came in short, shallow gasps. The realization hit her with cold certainty. She wasn't going home tonight. Not with this driver. And whatever was surrounding them, in the shadows or inside the car, wasn't human. Emily's pulse raced, her fingers gripping the edges of the seat as if it could somehow anchor her to reality. The car moved through the darkened streets, twisted and unfamiliar, the shadows outside stretching and writhing unnaturally. Every instinct screamed at her that she wasn't just lost, she was being guided into something she couldn't escape. Then it happened. From the back seat, a sound, a low, wet scraping, echoed faintly through the cabin. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She dared to glance over her shoulder, but the back seat appeared empty. Yet the sensation of being watched was overwhelming, pressing down on her chest like a living weight. The metallic scent surged again, sharper this time, almost choking her. Her eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw a pale, featureless figure leaning forward, watching her with eyes that seemed to pierce into her mind. Then it vanished, leaving only the faint echo of a breath, too deliberate to be hers. The driver's smile never wavered. "Almost there," he said softly, as if reading her panic, his voice calm and steady. Emily's stomach churned. She tried the door handle, locked. The phone still wouldn't work. She was trapped, moving deeper into the unknown, with a driver who shouldn't exist, and a presence in the car that might not be human. Outside, the streets twisted impossibly. Lights bent at unnatural angles, buildings shifted subtly when she blinked, and shadowy figures appeared, watching silently from the edges of the road. She realized with a cold certainty that this ride was no longer about reaching her home. It was about surviving, navigating a nightmare that had taken over the familiar world. Every second stretched, elongated by fear, as the whisper returned, soft, deliberate, impossibly close. "Don't fight it. Just follow." Emily shivered, realizing that whatever this ride had become, there was no turning back. Emily's chest heaved, every muscle tense, as the car twisted down streets she didn't recognize. The city around her seemed to bend and stretch unnaturally, buildings leaning at impossible angles, shadows stretching longer than they should, as if the night itself were alive and watching. She tried to speak, to demand answers, but no sound came out. Her throat felt tight, and the metallic scent in the car pressed against her like smoke. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw movement. Shadowy figures standing along the roadside, humanoid but distorted, their forms bending and slithering in impossible ways. Her hands went to the door handle, but it didn't budge. Panic surged, and she jerked around to the rearview mirror. For a moment, she thought she saw a pale figure sitting upright in the back seat, face featureless yet smiling, tilting its head toward her as if mocking her terror. Then it was gone. The driver's calm voice cut through the silence, unnervingly cheerful. "You're doing great. Just a little further." Emily's stomach dropped. She realized with cold certainty that the driver wasn't lost or mistaken. He had led her here deliberately. Somewhere unfamiliar, somewhere she shouldn't be. The road ahead seemed to stretch endlessly, twisting in ways that defied logic. Her pulse raced. Every instinct screamed at her to escape, yet she was trapped. The shadows outside, the impossible streets, the driver's unnerving calm, and that lingering presence in the back seat, everything pressed down on her simultaneously. The ride was no longer a ride. It was a trap, a nightmare made real. Emily pressed herself into the seat, praying silently that the next moment wouldn't be her last. Emily's heart hammered so violently she thought it might burst. The streets outside twisted impossibly, the shadows reaching closer with every flicker of the headlights. The silhouettes at the edges of the road were no longer just distant shapes. They moved with purpose, gliding, crawling, and twisting in ways that no human body could. Then she felt it, a pressure behind her, cold and heavy, as if the back seat itself had turned into a living weight, pressing against her. She spun in terror, but the seat was empty. Yet the sensation didn't vanish. Her skin crawled, and the metallic scent intensified, sharp and choking. The driver glanced at her through the rearview mirror, his smile wider than ever. "Almost there," he said softly. His calmness, his control, made her panic spike higher. Emily tried to scream, but no sound came out. Her hands fumbled at the locked doors. The phone remained frozen, unresponsive. She realized with bone-deep terror that she wasn't just trapped in the car, she was trapped in a space that had shifted beyond reality, guided by something that shouldn't exist. A whisper slithered past her ear, deliberate and chilling. "You're safe. For now," Emily gasped and glanced around. The shadows outside disappeared in an instant. The streets stretched back into some semblance of normality, and the metallic scent faded. But the dread didn't. The ride had ended, but something about the driver, the car, and the night lingered in her mind, a permanent, unsettling reminder. Some rides are not just journeys. They're encounters with something that doesn't belong in this world. Emily exhaled shakily, finally daring to move. But even as the familiar streetlights returned, she couldn't shake the feeling that the next ride could pull her back into that nightmare at any moment. Emily's hands were trembling as the car finally slowed. The streets outside looked familiar again, or at least familiar enough to trick her senses. The metallic scent had faded and the shadows had withdrawn, leaving only the ordinary night around her. She exhaled shakily, trying to convince herself it was over. The driver gave her a calm, knowing smile, as if he could read the fear etched across her face. "Home," he said simply. Emily's voice caught in her throat. "Yes, thank you," she managed to whisper. Her legs felt weak as she unbuckled her seatbelt and swung the door open. The night air hit her like a shock, cold and grounding. She stumbled onto the sidewalk, glancing back. The car was still there, the driver watching silently, smiling too widely, before slowly driving off into the dark. Her phone buzzed, a notification from the Uber app. The ride had been completed just like any other. But Emily knew better. Even as she walked toward her front door, every instinct screamed that this wasn't a normal driver, and that something about that night would linger forever. The feeling of being watched, of being guided, of encountering something impossible, it would haunt her. And with Emily safe for now, we move on to our next terrifying story. It begins with a simple task, delivering a package on a quiet, rainy night. But for Jake, a delivery driver, this ordinary night quickly turns into something he could never have anticipated. Shadows move differently when no one else is around. Strange figures appear where they shouldn't, and the familiar streets he's driven 1,000 times twist into something unrecognizable. By the time he reaches the delivery address, Jake realizes that sometimes the people, or things, waiting for you in the dark are far from ordinary. Jake wiped the rain off his windshield, squinting through the misty droplets. It was past midnight, and the streets were almost deserted. Most people were asleep, tucked safely in their beds, unaware of the quiet drizzle turning the asphalt into a slick, reflective surface. He adjusted the rearview mirror and glanced at the GPS. Another delivery, another package, Nothing out of the ordinary, or so he thought. His hands gripped the wheel tightly, the hum of the engine the only sound except for the rhythmic swish of windshield wipers. Jake pulled up to the next address, a small, nondescript house at the end of a cul-de-sac. Streetlights flickered sporadically, casting long shadows across the wet pavement. He parked and grabbed the package, the cardboard slightly damp from the rain. As he approached the front door, something felt off. The porch light flickered, and the shadows behind the thin curtains seemed to move independently, stretching unnaturally. He shook his head, blaming the fatigue and the late hour. "Just your imagination," he muttered under his breath. The door creaked open on its own, or maybe he had nudged it without noticing. Jake hesitated, holding the package in front of him like a shield. Inside, the house was dark, silent, but the air smelled wrong. Metallic, sharp, and almost suffocating. He set the package down carefully, his eyes scanning the dim interior. Something in the corner of the room caught his attention. A shadow, tall and thin, swaying slightly as if it had been waiting for him. His pulse quickened, and a chill ran down his spine. Jake swallowed hard, realizing that this delivery wasn't going to be routine. Not tonight. Jake's footsteps echoed softly against the wooden floor as he inched further into the house. The shadows seemed to shift and stretch with each step, bending unnaturally along the walls and corners. His heartbeat pounded in his chest, loud enough that he feared the sound would carry through the stillness, alerting whatever was waiting inside. He glanced at the package in his hands. The label confirmed the address, but it did nothing to calm the gnawing feeling in his stomach, the unease that had been building since he first arrived. The room smelled metallic, sharp, almost like blood, though he couldn't see anything to justify it. A sudden creak from upstairs made him freeze mid-step. His eyes darted toward the staircase. It was too silent, too still, yet the sound had been deliberate. Another soft creak, like the floorboard itself was breathing. Jake swallowed hard and whispered to himself, "Just the house settling, just the house settling." But the words did nothing to ease the tightening knot in his gut. He set the package down on a small table near the doorway, trying to stay calm. Then he noticed it, a shadow flitting across the far wall, too quick to be a trick of the light. He blinked, and it was gone. But the sense of being watched didn't leave. Every instinct screamed at him to leave, but something, curiosity, duty, or perhaps fear, kept him rooted in place. A cold draft swept through the hallway, carrying a whisper that made his blood run cold. "You shouldn't be here!" Jake froze, every hair on his body standing on end. The house, which had seemed ordinary a moment ago, now felt alive, aware of him, and decidedly unwelcoming. He realized that tonight's delivery was far from routine, and that whatever was inside was watching him, learning him, waiting. Jake's hands trembled as he edged down the narrow hallway, the dim light from the porch barely illuminating the floor. Every step felt heavy, as if the house itself were resisting his movement, the air thickening around him with an almost tangible weight. A soft whisper echoed again, low and deliberate, almost teasing. "You shouldn't be here." He spun around, heart hammering, but saw nothing. The shadows along the walls stretched unnaturally, writhing and bending, defying the angle of the light. For a fleeting moment he thought he saw a pale figure standing at the end of the hall, featureless and tall, just watching him. Then, as he blinked, it vanished. The metallic scent returned, stronger this time, and Jake gagged, pressing the back of his hand to his mouth. His pulse raced. The hallway seemed longer than it should, doors shifting subtly as if the house itself was warping around him. A sudden thud upstairs made him jump. He froze, straining his ears. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoed above him, though he was the only one in the house. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to leave immediately, but the thought of abandoning the package, of failing his delivery, rooted him in place. The shadows flickered again, coalescing into forms that twisted and swayed, humanoid yet impossible. Jake's breath came in shallow gasps, the whispering now more urgent, surrounding him from every direction. Go, or stay forever. Panic surged. He realized this wasn't just a haunted house or a trick of fatigue. This was something alive, aware, and hungry for attention. Jake's eyes darted from corner to corner, trying to find a place to hide, to escape, but the house seemed to stretch infinitely, twisting around him, leaving him trapped in the heart of its darkness. Jake's pulse raced, his body tense with fear, as the hallway seemed to twist before his eyes. The shadows along the walls no longer merely flickered, they moved independently, slithering toward him like living things. The metallic scent filled his lungs, sharp and choking, making him gag as he stumbled forward. A sudden creak from upstairs froze him in place. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, and heavy, descended toward him. His breath caught, each exhale shaky, his mind screaming at him to run. He glanced at the front door, but it wouldn't budge. The lock held firm, as if the house itself refused to let him escape. The whispers grew louder, circling him from every direction. You shouldn't be here. Leave. Or stay forever. He swung the flashlight from his phone, scanning the room. The walls seemed to ripple under the light, bending in impossible ways. The corners of the hallway stretched and contracted, as if the house were alive, breathing, watching. Then he saw it. At the far end of the hallway, a pale, featureless figure emerged from the shadows, impossibly tall, tilting its head as it studied him. Its presence pressed down on him, a suffocating weight that made it hard to breathe, made every muscle in his body scream in terror. Jake stumbled backward, tripping over the edge of a rug, heart hammering. The figure didn't move, didn't blink, it simply existed, radiating an awareness that made him feel like prey under its gaze. The whispers intensified, overlapping, a chorus of voices surrounding him. Go, or stay, forever. Jake's mind raced. He realized this was no ordinary delivery, no normal house. This was something alive, something that fed on fear, something that had been waiting for him. The package in his hands suddenly felt heavy, almost warm, as if it were connected to whatever presence had claimed this space. Panic surged. He had to get out. Somehow, he had to escape before the house, and the thing inside it claimed him completely. Jake's breath came in short, sharp gasps, each inhale a struggle against the cold weight pressing down on his chest. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, the shadows crawling along the walls like living fingers. The pale, featureless figure remained at the far end, tilting its head, unblinking, and impossibly still. Yet every nerve in Jake's body screamed that it was alive, aware of him, and hungry. The metallic scent in the air became suffocating, filling his lungs with a taste of iron that made his stomach churn. His hands trembled as he clutched the package, the edges suddenly cold and slick. He realized the object he had been carrying might be tied to this presence. Some connection he couldn't understand, but could feel pulsing in his bones. A whisper slithered past his ear, soft but deliberate. You shouldn't be here. Jake flinched, spinning around, but the hallway behind him seemed to ripple and twist. Every exit, every doorway he tried to reach, shifted, disappearing, replaced by more walls and more shadows. Panic surged. He took a shaky step forward, the floorboards groaning under his weight. The figure moved, not closer in a normal sense, but somehow its presence expanded, pressing into his mind like water filling a container. He could feel it, feel the awareness wrapping around him, feeding off his fear, testing him. Desperation clawed at him. He tried to scream, to call for help, but his voice failed, swallowed by the oppressive stillness. The shadows behind him flickered, coalescing into shapes that seemed almost human, yet twisted and wrong, writhing as if they were made of smoke and shadow. Jake's mind raced. He realized he had no choice. He had to keep moving, to confront whatever this was, or he might never leave this house alive. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but he couldn't see a clear path. Only darkness, only whispers, only the unrelenting presence at the end of the hallway. And then, as if sensing his resolve, the figure's form shifted slightly, leaning forward, its blank face tilting, inviting him. Jake swallowed hard, gripping the package tighter. Whatever this was, there was no turning back. Jake's legs shook as he took another step forward, the shadows seeming to curl around him like dark smoke. The pale, featureless figure loomed at the end of the hallway, impossibly tall, tilting its head as if studying his every move. Its presence pressed against him like an invisible hand, suffocating, demanding attention, testing his fear. The metallic scent was overwhelming now, sharp and acrid, filling his mouth and throat. Jake gagged, stumbling backward, and the shadows behind him flickered violently, coalescing into shapes that mimicked figures he had seen in his life, but distorted, grotesque, wrong. The whispers rose to a chorus, layered and insistent. Go, or stay, forever. Jake's pulse raced uncontrollably. The floor beneath him seemed to shift with every heartbeat, the hallway stretching impossibly, bending around him. He realized that the house itself was alive, feeding on fear, testing him, ensuring that escape was not guaranteed. Summoning every ounce of courage, he lunged forward, gripping the package tightly. The figure recoiled slightly, its blank face tilting further, as if surprised by his defiance. For a split second, the oppressive presence seemed to falter. An opening, fleeting and fragile. Jake bolted toward the front door, ignoring the thrumming weight of the air around him, ignoring the twisting shadows that reached for him. He swung the door open, the cold night air hitting him like a wall. Behind him, the house seemed to exhale, the whispers fading, the metallic scent retreating. But he knew the presence hadn't disappeared entirely. The familiar street stretched out before him, wet and glistening in the dim light of the street lamps. Jake didn't stop running until he was back in his car, heart hammering, hands slick with sweat. He realized that he had survived, but whatever lived in that house had not let him go completely. Jake slammed the car door shut and twisted the ignition with trembling hands. The engine roared to life, but his relief was fleeting. His headlights illuminated the sagging house, and for a heartbeat he swore the pale figure was still there, standing in the doorway, its head cocked at that same unnerving angle, watching him. "Just go," Jake muttered under his breath, flooring the gas pedal. The tires screeched against the wet pavement, carrying him down the deserted country road. His chest rose and fell in rapid bursts, lungs burning, every muscle in his body screaming for rest. But even as the house disappeared into the night, the dread lingered. His rearview mirror seemed to pull at his gaze, as though daring him to look back. Each glance showed only darkness, until one fleeting second when something pale flickered in the distance, trailing him. Jake nearly swerved off the road. He tried the radio for distraction, but all he got was static. The whispers returned, faint but undeniable, woven into the crackle. "Go, or stay, forever." The words clung to him like a curse, vibrating in his bones. Jake gripped the wheel tighter, muttering prayers under his breath, his eyes darting between the road and the mirror. The farther he drove, the heavier the weight in his chest became, like a tether connecting him to the house, to that presence. He wondered if leaving was even possible, or if he'd only carried the nightmare with him. By the time he reached the dim glow of a gas station on the edge of town, dawn was beginning to paint the sky with pale streaks. Jake parked beneath the flickering fluorescent lights, chest still heaving. He forced himself to look into the mirror one last time. His blood ran cold. In the reflection, the back seat wasn't empty. Jake's breath hitched, his chest tightening as his eyes locked on the mirror. For a split second he thought it had to be his imagination, a trick of exhaustion, of nerves frayed to the breaking point. But no amount of blinking or squinting changed what he saw. In the faint reflection just behind his shoulder sat a shape. Slumped low, its head tilted forward, strands of stringy hair hiding most of its face. Pale skin stretched too tightly over bone. The thing's body looked folded in on itself, as though it had been crammed into the seat like luggage. Jake whipped around, but the back seat was empty. His heart hammered so hard he could feel it in his throat. He blinked furiously, then looked again at the mirror. It was still there. And this time its head was lifting. Slowly. Like it wanted him to see. Jake fumbled for the door handle, every nerve screaming for him to get out, to run. But the door wouldn't budge. It felt locked from the outside. He pressed his face to the glass, banging on it, desperate for someone in the gas station to notice. The attendant behind the counter barely glanced up, uninterested in his frantic pounding. The whispering rose again, not through the static this time, but from inside the car, right at his ear. A voice that didn't sound human. Dry, raspy, like breath moving over cracked wood. "You shouldn't have come. Now you can't leave." Jake's skin crawled. He slammed his fists against the wheel, yelling, "What do you want from me?" The reflection in the mirror answered, not with words, but with a smile. Lips stretched impossibly wide, teeth jagged, wrong. Jake tore the keys from the ignition and stumbled out, finally breaking free as the door gave way. He staggered across the lot, chest heaving, knees weak. But when he dared glance back at his car, the interior was empty again, still, as though nothing had ever been there at all. And yet Jake knew. Something had followed him. Something that wouldn't let him go. Jake leaned against the side of the gas station, sucking in ragged breaths of cold morning air. His hands shook violently, his knees refusing to steady beneath him. The world felt wrong, too bright, too sharp, as though reality itself had been thinned by whatever he had brought with him. The attendant stepped outside to smoke, giving Jake a strange look. "Rough night?" he asked casually. Jake opened his mouth to respond, to beg someone, anyone, to believe him. But the words caught in his throat. Behind the man, in the shimmer of the station's glass door, Jake saw it again. The figure, standing upright now, just over his shoulder, its pale outline blurred and flickered like a bad reflection, but its face was clear, those hollow eyes, that stretched grin. The sight froze Jake's blood, but the attendant didn't react. He couldn't see it. Jake staggered back, nearly tripping over himself, muttering, No, it can't." The whispers returned, swirling all around him, louder than before, layered with voices upon voices, speaking in tones he couldn't recognize. Some hissed in his ear, others pressed against the inside of his skull. One word stood out among the chaos, repeating, relentless, "Stay, stay, stay." He stumbled toward his car, then stopped. The thought of getting back inside that vehicle, sitting where the thing had been, it was unbearable. But what was the alternative? Run? Where? He had no answers, no safety. He was realizing the truth. This wasn't about the house. It wasn't about the delivery. The thing had chosen him. Jake pressed his palms to his eyes, willing it to vanish, to leave him. But when he pulled his hands away, his reflection stared back at him in the gas station window. And it wasn't his own. The face in the glass was grinning. Jake stumbled backward from the gas station window, bile rising in his throat. The reflection hadn't just grinned, it had moved differently, out of sync with him, like it belonged to something else entirely. Its lips mouthed words his ears couldn't hear, but his bones seemed to understand. "You're mine now." He staggered into the street, barely hearing the blare of a horn as a car swerved to miss him. Adrenaline coursed through him, but no matter how far he ran, every reflective surface caught the thing lingering just a step behind, a warped version of himself smiling wider each time. By the time he reached his apartment, the sun was up, yet daylight brought no comfort. His mirrors, the black screen of his TV, even the gleam of his phone, they all betrayed him, showing that same grinning figure staring back. Jake smashed the bathroom mirror in desperation, but even in the jagged shards it looked back at him. That night, Jake sat alone in the dark, curtains drawn, every screen covered, every surface hidden. Still the whispers came. Still he felt its eyes on him, and in his final desperate thought before sleep overtook him, Jake realized the cruelest truth of all. Sometimes you don't bring something back from a place. Sometimes it brings itself into you. And just like that, the next tale reminds us. Danger doesn't always wait in abandoned houses or shadowed woods. Sometimes it climbs right into the passenger seat, uninvited. Let's move on. To another ride that went very wrong. Marcus had been driving Uber for almost a year, and he liked to think he'd seen it all. Rowdy drunks, couples arguing in the back seat, even a man who insisted on bringing a giant birdcage with him on a midnight ride. But nothing in his long list of odd encounters came close to what happened one stormy night just outside the city limits. The rain was relentless, hammering down so hard the wipers barely kept up. The streets were empty, the glow of streetlights blurred into smeared halos through the windshield. Marcus had been debating whether to call it a night when the app pinged. A new request. The pickup location was unusual, an old service road that wound out toward the marshes. Not the kind of place people usually called from at 2 a.m. Still, it was surge pricing, and Marcus couldn't ignore the extra cash. He accepted and followed the GPS, his tires splashing through puddles, as the city gave way to quiet rural stretches. When he arrived, there was no house, no building, just a single figure standing on the roadside. A woman, drenched from head to toe, her hair plastered to her face. She didn't wave, didn't gesture, just stood still as the rain poured around her. Marcus hesitated, knuckles tightening on the wheel. Something about the way she stood there, motionless like a statue, set his teeth on edge. But the app had confirmed the ride, and she was clearly waiting. With a sigh, he unlocked the doors. The woman slid into the back seat without a word, dripping water onto the leather seats. Marcus forced a smile, adjusted the mirror, and asked where she was headed. She didn't answer. The silence in the car was suffocating. Marcus tried again, his voice careful but upbeat. "Rough night, huh? Where can I take you?" No reply. The woman just stared out the rain-streaked window, her shoulders rigid, her face hidden beneath a curtain of wet hair. Marcus adjusted the rearview mirror, uneasy at how still she sat. Her breathing was so faint he couldn't even be sure she was alive. The GPS automatically plotted a route, as though she had entered the destination herself. A small town, 20 minutes away, in the opposite direction of the city. Marcus hesitated, then shrugged, and pulled back onto the slick road. The car filled with the rhythmic thump of wipers and the hiss of tires against pavement. Normally, Marcus didn't mind quiet passengers, but this was different. The air felt heavy, like the storm outside had crept into the car. Every so often he stole glances into the mirror. Each time her posture seemed different. Once her head was turned slightly more toward him, though he hadn't seen her move. Another time her pale hand had slid across the seat, fingers curled as if reaching for something. "Everything okay back there?" he asked, his voice breaking the tension. Still nothing. But then, so soft he almost doubted he heard it, she whispered something, just one word. "Home." The sound was raspy, strained, and it sent a shiver crawling up Marcus's spine. Marcus gripped the wheel tighter, the whispered word echoing in his ears. Home. He glanced at the GPS again. The blue line guided him off the main highway onto a narrow road that cut through thick woods. He frowned. There was nothing out here but farmland and swamp. No subdivisions, no streetlights, not even gas stations. The rain had slowed to a mist, leaving the windshield fogged at the edges. The silence in the car was so complete that Marcus could hear the faint tick of the dashboard clock. He risked another look in the mirror. The woman hadn't moved, still slumped, still dripping, her face hidden. But there was something about the way her head angled slightly toward him now. He could feel her eyes, even if he couldn't see them. Uneasy, he tried humor to cut the tension. "So, what's home like? Big family waiting on you?" The woman didn't laugh, didn't answer. Instead, she slowly raised one hand and pointed. Not at the road ahead, not at the GPS. She was pointing directly at Marcus. His stomach dropped. He jerked his eyes back to the road, pulse hammering in his throat. "Okay, that's not funny," he muttered, forcing a nervous laugh. But the air in the car only grew heavier, pressing down on him like a weight. When he finally dared another look in the mirror, her hand was back in her lap, as though it had never moved at all. The road narrowed to little more than a cracked strip of pavement swallowed by trees. Branches arched overhead, blotting out what little light filtered through the storm clouds. Marcus had to ease his foot off the gas, guiding the car through puddles that reflected the headlights like black mirrors. The GPS cheerfully announced, "In 3 miles you will arrive at your destination." Marcus shook his head. "What destination? There's nothing out here." His voice sounded too loud in the cabin, bouncing against the suffocating silence. He glanced in the mirror. The woman still hadn't spoken, hadn't moved, yet somehow she seemed closer. The shadows pooled differently around her, as if the dark itself had shifted to make room. Marcus's unease grew with every passing second. He forced himself to keep talking, as much for his sanity as for any hope of response. "Listen, if this is some kind of prank, it's not funny. You've got to tell me where you're actually going." This time she answered, but not in words. A sound emerged from the back seat. Wet, ragged, like fabric being wrung out or water dripping onto soaked wood. The stench hit next, sharp and sour, like stagnant pond water. Marcus gagged, rolling down his window to gulp fresh air, the rain spattering against his arm. He dared a glance back. The woman's head had turned, not fully, just enough that a pale cheek and part of her mouth were visible. And she was smiling. Marcus's grip on the wheel tightened until his knuckles ached. The road seemed endless, stretching deeper into a part of the county he didn't recognize. His GPS arrow pulsed calmly, as though nothing were wrong, though every instinct screamed at him to turn back. "In 1 mile you will arrive at your destination," the app chimed. Marcus flicked at the phone screen, zooming out on the map. His stomach dropped. The route ended in a grey patch, no street name, no markers, just empty terrain. The system shouldn't have been able to generate it at all. He glanced in the mirror again. The woman was sitting upright now, her soaked hair clinging to her gaunt face. Her eyes caught the dim glow of the dash, wide and unblinking, fixed squarely on him. Marcus's voice cracked as he tried to reason. "Look, I can drop you off at a gas station instead, all right? Somewhere safe, somewhere with people." The woman leaned forward slightly, her lips barely parting, and for the first time, Marcus heard her clearly. "Keep driving." Her voice was wrong, flat, hollow, echoing as though it came from somewhere far beneath the earth. The sound of it sent a jolt of ice straight through his veins. Marcus swallowed hard, his foot trembling on the accelerator. The trees on either side seemed to close in tighter, hemming him into this cursed road. A flash of lightning lit up the forest. For an instant, Marcus saw shapes among the trees, dozens of pale figures standing motionless, their eyes catching the light like glass. And then darkness swallowed them again. The car's engine whined as Marcus pressed harder on the gas. He didn't dare slow down now. The GPS chirped one last time. "You have arrived at your destination." Marcus's stomach knotted as the road widened into a gravel clearing swallowed by fog. No houses, no lights, nothing but the silhouette of dead trees clawing at the sky. The car's headlights cut a pale circle through the mist, illuminating an old wooden sign so weathered the letters had nearly rotted away. He could just make out a single word carved deep into the wood. Cemetery. Marcus's breath stuttered. His hands hovered over the wheel, torn between slamming the car into reverse or flooring it forward just to escape. "Okay, this is a joke, some kind of sick joke," he whispered, though his voice trembled with disbelief. In the rearview mirror, the woman finally shifted. Slowly, deliberately, she leaned forward, her wet hair sliding away from her face. Marcus caught her reflection for the first time in full, and his heart lurched. Her skin was waxy and grey, her lips tinged blue, her eyes dull but glistening like glass marbles. Water dripped steadily from her clothes, pooling at her feet, and she was smiling. Not kindly, not gratefully, no. It was the kind of smile that promised he had taken her exactly where she wanted him to go. Marcus's pulse thundered in his ears. He gripped the shifter with shaking hands, about to throw the car into reverse, when he heard it, doors unlocking on their own with a soft click. From the mist outside, other shapes began to stir, pale outlines, dozens of them moving slowly toward the car. Marcus's hands shook violently on the wheel. The fog thickened, wrapping the clearing in a suffocating blanket of grey. The outlines of the pale figures grew sharper with each heartbeat, their movements unnervingly slow but purposeful. They were surrounding the car. The woman in the back seat leaned closer, her icy breath fogging the rear window. "Drive," she whispered, her voice low and rasping, pressing against Marcus's mind more than his ears. Marcus swallowed hard, gripping the wheel tighter. He slammed the shifter into drive, tires spinning over gravel, but the fog seemed to push against him, the figures closing in faster than he could accelerate. A flash of lightning illuminated them fully, dozens of bodies, wet, pale, with blank stares and crooked smiles, advancing silently through the mist. The car headlights barely penetrated the sea of white faces, but Marcus could feel their eyes on him, unblinking, hungry. He yanked the wheel, trying to maneuver out of the clearing, but the road behind him had vanished. Gravel and mud stretched endlessly into darkness, no path to freedom. Panic clawed at his throat. The woman's hand touched the back of his seat, cold as ice. "You can't leave," she whispered, the words vibrating through his chest. Marcus slammed on the brakes. Tires skidded, sending gravel flying. He pounded the horn, desperate for attention, for help, for anything. but the only sound that answered was the soft, wet shuffle of dozens of figures moving closer. For the first time, Marcus realized he wasn't just delivering her. He had driven straight into a trap. Marcus's chest heaved as he fought to control the car, his mind scrambling for any plan. The fog pressed against the windshield like a living wall, the pale figures advancing silently, impossibly close. Every instinct screamed at him to reverse, to ram through, to escape, but every movement felt delayed, as if the road itself were conspiring against him. The woman in the back seat leaned fully forward now, her wet hair plastered to her face. Her eyes met his in the rearview mirror. They were empty, yet knowing, as if she held all the secrets of the night, all the paths through the fog. "They want you," she whispered, her voice cutting through the storm. Marcus blinked, confused. What are you talking about?" His hands shook so hard he could barely grip the wheel. The figures pressed closer, their pale faces reflecting in the side mirrors, in the windows, everywhere. Marcus's stomach churned as he realized the terrible truth. They weren't just shadows. They were waiting for him, surrounding him, ready to drag him into the darkness behind the fog. A cold realization hit him. This wasn't about the ride, this wasn't about her. It was about him. Whatever had summoned her had chosen him, guided him here, and now there was no turning back. The woman leaned even closer. "You can't leave," she breathed, and this time Marcus could feel the words in his bones, in his blood. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the clearing. For a heartbeat, Marcus saw hundreds of pale eyes, countless grins, all focused on him. The fog seemed to pulse around the car, alive, waiting, hungering. He slammed the accelerator, tires screeching over gravel, knowing it might not save him, but it was all he had. Marcus's hands ached from gripping the wheel, knuckles white, sweat stinging his eyes. The fog had thickened to a choking grey, swallowing the headlights and stretching the gravel road into nothing. The pale figures pressed closer from every side, their silent movements synchronized, almost deliberate, like a tide moving to claim him. The woman leaned forward once more, whispering, "You can't run, you can't hide." Marcus swallowed hard, panic clawing at his throat. He pressed the accelerator, tires spinning, but the road behind him seemed to vanish into mist. No path of escape, no light of the city, nothing familiar. The figures began moving faster, gliding across the ground with impossible grace. A sudden flash of lightning illuminated the clearing, and Marcus saw them clearly. Dozens, maybe hundreds, all pale, all staring, all grinning. And at the center, she stood, the woman. Not in the back seat this time, but outside at the edge of the fog, beckoning. "Come," she hissed. His stomach dropped. The figures advanced as one, their steps silent, their gaze fixed on him. Marcus realized the chilling truth. He hadn't been driving them anywhere. They had been bringing him here. His pulse hammered in his ears. He didn't know if the road led to death, disappearance, or something far worse, but he knew he had to move. Tires screeched as he swerved left and right, but the fog seemed endless, a labyrinth with no exit. And as the first of the figures reached the car, Marcus understood the final, horrifying truth. He was already too late. Marcus's vision blurred with rain and panic. The figures pressed closer, pale faces glinting in the occasional lightning flash. His hands shook as he fought the wheel, desperate to find a way out, any way. Then, as if sensing his final moment of defiance, the woman in the back seat rose slowly. Her body seemed to stretch unnaturally, filling the car with a cold presence that made Marcus gasp. Her eyes locked on his, dark and endless, and for a heartbeat, the world outside disappeared. "Stay with us," she whispered, her voice echoing through his bones. The car jolted violently. Marcus screamed, slamming the brakes and jerking the wheel. When he looked up, the fog had thinned. The figures, the forest, even the gravel clearing, they were gone. In their place was an empty stretch of road, silent, except for the rain. He exhaled shakily, tears streaming down his face, heart pounding like a drum. The passenger seat was empty. The back seat was empty. The Uber app showed no rides, but the chill remained. The gnawing certainty that whatever he had picked up that night had not left him, that it had chosen him, that it could appear anywhere, any time. Marcus drove the rest of the way home in silence, hands clammy, eyes darting to every mirror, every shadow. He knew one thing for certain. Some passengers don't vanish because the ride ends. They vanish because they want to take you with them. Tina had always liked the quiet rides. Driving for Uber in the city late at night, most passengers either slept, scrolled on their phones, or chatted politely. But nothing too loud, nothing that disturbed her rhythm. That's why she didn't think twice when a request popped up from a rider at the edge of the industrial district around 1:30 a.m. The location was a dimly lit street near empty warehouses, a part of town she usually avoided at night. But the fare promised a high surge, and she figured it would be a short trip anyway. When she arrived, there was no one waiting in sight, just a shadow near a street lamp, shifting slightly as the light flickered. Tina rolled the window down. "Hello? I'm here for your ride," she called. The shadow stepped forward. It was a man, tall, drenched in rain, with a hood pulled low over his face. He didn't speak, didn't gesture, just opened the door and slid silently into the back seat. Tina felt a shiver run down her spine. Something about the stillness unnerved her. Even the rhythmic patter of the rain seemed to pause when he got in. She started the car, pulling away from the curb. "Where to?" she asked, trying to keep her tone light. The man didn't answer. Tina gripped the steering wheel tighter, forcing herself to focus on the road. The industrial streets were nearly deserted, broken only by the occasional flickering streetlight and the distant hum of a freight train. Yet every shadow seemed to stretch unnaturally, reaching toward the car as if to swallow it whole. She risked a glance in the rear-view mirror. The man sat perfectly still, hands folded in his lap, hood still pulled low over his face. She couldn't see his eyes, couldn't see his expression, but she could feel a weight in the back seat, like the darkness had taken shape. Trying to calm herself, she cleared her throat. "Rough night out?" The words sounded hollow, even to her own ears. No response, not even a whisper. Just the steady tap of rain against the windshield and the faint creak of the seatbelt. The car passed a chain-link fence enclosing an abandoned warehouse. Tina's headlights illuminated a pile of discarded pallets, and for a heartbeat, she swore she saw something moving between the shadows. Something pale. She blinked, and it was gone. Her pulse quickened. She tried rationalizing. Rats, maybe a stray cat, anything plausible. But deep in her gut, a cold shiver told her this was neither. The silence in the car seemed heavier now, pressing against her chest, muting the sound of the rain, of the tires on the wet asphalt. She adjusted the heat, trying to fill the space with some normalcy. Warm air fogged the windshield slightly, yet the man didn't move. He didn't react to the temperature, to the car, to her presence at all. It was as if he existed in a different plane, tethered to her ride, but untouchable. Tina forced her eyes on the GPS, hoping for distraction. The route was normal. Take the main road, turn right at the next intersection, follow past the old factory. But the road ahead seemed darker than it should be, the streetlights dimming just slightly one after another, as though they feared to illuminate him. She risked another look at the rearview mirror. The man's hood had shifted, revealing a pale cheek, ghostly and still wet from the rain. His mouth was slightly open, not speaking, but the outline of a smile pressed faintly against the darkness. It wasn't friendly. It wasn't human. Tina swallowed hard, trying to keep her breathing steady. Every instinct screamed at her to pull over, to let him out, to call someone. But the road stretched ahead, empty and silent, and the GPS voice repeated its instructions in calm, unnerving monotone. It felt like the world itself was urging her forward. A sudden noise snapped her attention, the faintest scrape from the back seat, almost imperceptible. Her heart jumped. The man's head tilted just slightly toward her. For a moment she felt his presence fill the car, suffocating, unrelenting. The realization hit her in a cold rush. This ride was far from ordinary, and whatever it wasn't planning to let her end it anytime soon. Tina's grip on the wheel tightened as she drove. The streets had grown emptier, the glow of distant streetlights flickering intermittently. The rain had slowed to a mist, leaving a damp chill that seeped through the car's windows. She risked a glance in the rearview mirror again. The man hadn't moved, but something about his stillness was wrong. Too perfect, too deliberate. It was as if he existed outside of time, observing her as much as she was driving him somewhere. She tried to speak, her voice shaking slightly. "So, you don't talk much, huh?" No response. The silence that followed was heavier than the rain, thick enough to feel. The faint hum of the tires against wet asphalt sounded unnaturally loud. The road turned sharply, leading her past an abandoned factory. The building's broken windows reflected the car's headlights, and for a moment she thought she saw hundreds of pale faces pressed against the glass. She blinked, and they were gone. Her heart began to race. Every instinct in her screamed to pull over, to escape, but the man's presence in the back seat made her hesitate. It wasn't just silence, it was pressure, a suffocating weight that made her chest tight and her thoughts jumble. She risked another look at him. His hood had shifted slightly, revealing a hollow, pale cheekbone. His mouth twitched upward in a slow, impossible smile that didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. Tina swallowed hard, trying to force rationality. It's just someone playing a prank, right? A chill crawled up her spine. She adjusted the mirror, the GPS, anything to break the tension, but the map showed only empty streets ahead, no landmarks, nothing to indicate they were anywhere familiar. A scraping sound echoed softly from the back seat. Not a thump, not a bump, something sliding, brushing against the upholstery. Her breath caught in her throat. The man's head tilted, just slightly, toward her, as if acknowledging her fear. Tina's pulse raced. Her hands shook, her knuckles white on the wheel. She pressed down harder on the accelerator, hoping the speed would break the spell, but the mist thickened, swallowing the headlights, distorting the road. And then she realized this wasn't just a silent ride, this was a trap. Every instinct, every sound, every shadow was telling her that whatever was in her back seat, it wasn't going to let her leave. Tina's hands were trembling as she navigated the misty road. The familiar hum of the engine felt distant, almost hollow, like the car itself was part of the strange stillness. The streetlights ahead flickered and died one by one, leaving the road barely illuminated by her headlights. Shadows danced across the asphalt, stretching longer and darker than they should have. She risked a glance in the rearview mirror. The man hadn't moved, but the mist behind him seemed to swirl unnaturally, pooling around the edges of his hood like smoke. Her pulse quickened. She tried to think logically. Maybe it's just the fog, the rain, nothing more. But deep in her gut, she knew better. The car passed a dead-end street that hadn't been on her GPS. The route was supposed to curve right, but here the asphalt ended abruptly, replaced by overgrown weeds and cracked concrete. She slowed, heart hammering, hoping the mist would clear, hoping the road would straighten. But the man leaned slightly forward, just enough to block the faint light from the dashboard. A soft scraping echoed from behind her seat again, not loud enough to be tangible, but audible enough to make her flinch. Her eyes darted to the back seat. His hood had shifted again, revealing pale, damp skin that glistened unnaturally in the dim light. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. Why isn't he talking? Why isn't he leaving? The questions hit her in waves, each more panicked than the last. The fog thickened, clinging to the car like a living thing. The world outside was gone, replaced by a grey, suffocating void. Tina realized with a jolt that she had no idea where she was, no idea how to escape, and no idea if the man in the back seat even belonged to this reality. And as the car idled forward into the mist, she felt it. A subtle, almost imperceptible pressure on her mind, a silent insistence that the ride wasn't over, and that she would never be alone again. Tina's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, her breath shallow and uneven. The mist outside thickened, smearing the headlights into ghostly halos that danced across the cracked pavement. She stole a glance at the rear-view mirror. The man was still there, perfectly still, yet somehow he seemed closer, his presence pressing down on her chest. The car creaked under the weight of the silence, every small noise amplified, the tick of the turn signal, the faint hum of the heater, the whisper of tires over wet asphalt. She risked another look. The hood had slipped further back. His pale cheek was now fully visible, wet strands of hair clinging to his face. And his eyes, when she saw them, cold and black, her stomach lurched. Tina's foot trembled over the brake pedal. Every instinct screamed at her to stop, to pull over, to scream for help. But the road stretched endlessly, empty, foggy, unbroken. A soft, dragging sound came from the back seat. Her head whipped around. Nothing had moved visibly, but the sound persisted, steady, wet, deliberate. She forced herself to breathe, trying to focus on the GPS. The voice repeated its directions, calm, robotic, and somehow sinister. Turn right in 500 feet, but the street ahead wasn't on any map she'd ever seen. Tina's heart pounded so hard it felt like it would burst. Every shadow, every reflection, every whisper of mist seemed to watch her, to track her, to anticipate her panic. The man leaned forward slightly, just enough that his presence filled the small space of the car. Her skin crawled as she felt the pressure of his gaze in the pit of her stomach. And then she realized this ride had a destination. She couldn't refuse, a path she couldn't control, and a passenger who was not bound by the rules of the world she knew. Tina's hands trembled violently as she gripped the wheel. The fog had thickened into an almost solid wall, swallowing the road and stretching the darkness ahead into a void. She glanced at the rearview mirror. The man's hood had slipped completely back, revealing a pale, wet face that reflected the dim light of the dashboard. His black eyes seemed to pierce right through her. A chill ran down her spine as she noticed the back seat felt colder than the rest of the car, icy, almost frozen. Her breath fogged in the cabin, her pulse hammering in her ears. The GPS voice repeated its instructions calmly. "You have arrived at your destination." Tina blinked. There was nothing ahead, just fog, cracked pavement, and the skeletal outline of trees silhouetted against a dull grey sky. Her stomach twisted. This isn't a street," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She risked another glance in the mirror. The man was leaning slightly forward now, his wet hair plastered to his face, a slow, impossible smile curling his lips. She could feel it in her bones. He was in control. A scraping sound came from the back seat again, louder this time, wet and deliberate. Her heart leapt to her throat. Her mind screamed at her to stop, to reverse, to escape, but the fog outside refused to yield. The road seemed to stretch endlessly into nowhere. Then for a moment, the mist parted slightly. Through the swirling grey, she saw shapes, pale humanoid silhouettes, standing silently among the trees, watching, waiting, their black eyes fixed on her. Tina pressed her foot harder on the accelerator, tires spinning over slick asphalt. The figures didn't move closer. They were already there, surrounding her, yet impossibly still. And in that instant, Tina realized the horrifying truth. This was no ordinary ride. The passenger wasn't human, the road wasn't real, and escape wasn't an option. The ride had begun, and it wasn't going to end until it was ready. Tina's hands shook violently as she gripped the wheel, knuckles straining white against the leather. The fog outside thickened into an oppressive wall, swallowing her headlights and stretching the road into an endless void. The man in the back seat leaned forward slightly. His wet hair clung to his pale face, and his black eyes locked on hers through the rearview mirror. His presence pressed against her chest, heavy and suffocating. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to breathe, to think, this isn't real, it can't be real. But the cold, the silence, and the unnatural stillness of her passenger told her otherwise. A scraping sound echoed from behind her again. This time, it was accompanied by a faint whisper, so low she could barely hear it. "Drive!" Tina's pulse surged. Her stomach churned as she pressed harder on the accelerator, tires skidding over slick pavement. The fog shifted around the car, forming shapes, pale faces that watched her, dozens of them standing silently among the trees. The GPS repeated the instructions in its eerie monotone. "Turn right in 300 feet. She risked a glance at the street ahead. There was no intersection, only more fog, more shadows, more impossibility. The man's smile widened slightly, unnatural, impossible. It was slow, deliberate, as if savoring her fear. The pressure in the back seat increased, pressing her forward, pressing her to obey. Tina gritted her teeth, trying to fight it. Her foot slammed harder on the accelerator, tires spinning on the wet asphalt, but the figures outside didn't react. They were already surrounding the car, waiting for her to arrive. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps. The world outside twisted and warped, streets bending, shadows lengthening, fog thickening into shapes that reached for her. And through it all, the man whispered again, softer this time, almost tenderly, "You can't leave, not yet." Tina's vision blurred, rain streaking across the windshield like liquid glass. The road ahead had vanished into grey mist, and every shadow seemed to pulse and shift, alive, watching her. The man in the back seat leaned fully forward, his presence filling the car, pressing down with an unshakable weight. His black eyes were endless, staring straight into hers, and his pale face reflected the dashboard lights in a way that made her stomach twist. She tried to speak, to demand answers, but her voice caught in her throat. The words refused to come out. The silence in the car became deafening, swallowing the faint hum of the engine, the rhythm of the tires on wet asphalt. The scraping from the back seat grew louder, more deliberate. It was as if something was moving just beyond her perception, circling, testing, waiting for her to break. Tina forced herself to look at the rearview mirror. The man's smile had widened impossibly, his lips curling in a way that defied human anatomy. Cold droplets of water fell from his hair onto the seat, yet he remained dry elsewhere, unreal, unbound by the laws of nature. The fog outside thickened into shapes, dozens of pale, humanoid figures emerging silently from the mist. They didn't move toward the car. They didn't move at all. Yet she could feel them pressing in, folding the world into their will. Her pulse hammered in her ears as the GPS spoke again, the calm monotone clashing with the terror. "You have arrived at your destination." Tina's stomach churned. There was no destination visible, only fog, shadows, and the infinite road stretching in every direction. The realization hit her like ice. The ride wasn't ending. She wasn't meant to leave. The man's voice whispered again, low, intimate, chilling. "It's time to join us." Tina's hands tightened on the wheel, her mind screaming for escape, for sanity, for any shred of reality to cling to. But the mist had swallowed everything, and she felt herself sliding into a world she couldn't control, a ride that wouldn't let her go. Tina's heart hammered so violently it drowned out all other sounds. The mist outside had thickened into an impenetrable grey wall, hiding everything beyond a few feet, yet she could feel the shapes moving, watching, waiting. The man in the back seat leaned even closer, his wet hair sliding from his pale face. His black eyes seemed to pierce through the rearview mirror, anchoring her gaze with a force that made her chest tighten. The car's interior felt impossibly small, the fog pressing through the windows as if it were alive. Every shadow seemed to twist and pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. A scraping sound echoed again, louder and sharper. It was coming from just behind her, and yet no one was visible. She turned her head slowly. The seat appeared empty. But the presence was undeniable. Tina's hands shook as she gripped the wheel, trying to maintain control. The GPS voice spoke once more, calm and mechanical. "Continue straight for 500 feet. But the road ahead was gone, replaced by nothing but mist and the faint outline of dark, twisted shapes. She risked another glance in the rearview mirror. The man's smile had grown wider, unnatural, stretching in a way that defied reality. His presence radiated a cold insistence, and Tina felt as though he were already part of the fog outside. Shapes emerged from the mist, pale humanoid silhouettes, dozens of them surrounding the car. They didn't move, yet their gaze, black and empty, bore into her, pulling her forward, closer to something she could not comprehend. Her mind screamed for escape, for logic, for any way to break free, but the car moved on its own, tires gliding over a road that didn't exist. The fog seemed alive, bending reality, forcing her to obey. The man whispered again, soft yet omnipresent. "It's too late to turn back." The words crawled under her skin, chilling her blood, freezing her thoughts. Tina's pulse raced, fear clawing at every fibre of her body. She realized she was no longer driving. The car had become a vessel, carrying her into a world she could neither see nor understand. The ride was over, in name only, and she was trapped. Tina's hands were slick with sweat as the car glided through the fog. The road had vanished entirely, replaced by swirling grey mist that twisted and bent like a living thing. The man in the back seat leaned fully forward, his pale face inches from hers. His black eyes held an impossible depth, and his slow, unnatural smile promised something she could not comprehend. The scraping sound from the back seat had grown into a rhythmic, deliberate noise, echoing in the small cabin, vibrating through her bones. She couldn't tell if it was coming from him or the mist itself. Shapes moved outside the car, pale humanoid silhouettes, endless and silent, shifting closer and farther away at impossible speeds. Their eyes, black voids, never blinked, never wavered. They were waiting. The GPS spoke again, calm and monotone. "You have arrived at your destination." Tina swallowed hard. She could see nothing, only grey fog and the cold stare of countless figures surrounding the car. A chill pressed against her chest, suffocating, inescapable. The man's whisper came again, soft and omnipresent. "Join us." Tina's vision blurred. The mist seeped into the car, curling around her like smoke, filling every corner with cold, wet fingers. She realized with a jolt that escape was impossible, the ride wasn't over, and it never would be. Her pulse thundered, her mind screaming for logic, for reality, for life itself. But the car moved onward, through a place that shouldn't exist, toward a destination she couldn't see. The man's smile widened further, stretching impossibly across his face. The fog pressed closer, the silhouettes beyond the glass pressing toward her, and Tina felt the final, horrifying truth. She was not alone, and she would never be alone again. And then the world went silent, the fog swallowing everything, leaving only the oppressive presence of the passenger, and the certainty that some rides never end. Alex had driven for Uber for years, but tonight felt different from the start. The city was quieter than usual, almost eerily so, with only a few distant sirens and the occasional hum of streetlights breaking the stillness. His last ride request appeared from a location at the edge of the city, a neighborhood he had driven past countless times but never visited after dark. The GPS confirmed it. An abandoned-looking cul-de-sac, streets lined with dilapidated houses and cracked pavement. When he arrived, no one was waiting under the flickering streetlight, only shadows. He honked once, softly, and a figure stepped forward from the mist, a young woman drenched from the rain, hood pulled low over her face. She didn't speak, didn't smile, just slid into the back seat silently. Alex noticed her hands were cold, almost icy, and her presence filled the small space of the car like a heavy fog. Something about her stillness made his chest tighten. "Where to?" he asked, trying to keep his tone casual. The words sounded hollow, even to him. No answer came. Just the faint tapping of raindrops on the windshield and the hum of the engine. As he pulled onto the road, he realized the fog was thicker here, curling around the streetlights, muting the city beyond. Shadows stretched across the asphalt, flickering unnaturally in the headlights. He risked a glance in the rearview mirror. The woman's hood had slipped slightly, revealing pale, wet strands of hair clinging to her face. Her eyes, when they met his, were dark, endless, and completely unreadable. Alex tried to focus on the road, but every instinct screamed that something was wrong. Every street looked the same, every turn seemed to loop back, and the mist outside pressed in like a living thing. And as the car moved forward, silent, except for the rain, Alex realized that this ride wasn't just a normal drop-off. It was a journey into something far darker, something he couldn't control, and something that might never end. Alex's hands tightened on the steering wheel, his knuckles white as the fog thickened around the car. The familiar streets had disappeared, replaced by a grey, endless void that seemed to swallow the headlights. He stole a glance at the rearview mirror. The woman sat perfectly still, hands folded neatly in her lap, her wet hair clinging to her pale face. Her dark eyes seemed to follow every movement he made, unblinking, unrelenting. He cleared his throat, trying to break the tension. "So, you live around here?" "Round." No answer came. The silence inside the car was deafening, broken only by the faint tap of rain on the roof and the hum of the engine. The road ahead curved unnaturally, looping in ways that made his stomach twist. Streetlights flickered, casting shadows that moved independently, stretching toward the car as if alive. Alex tried to rationalize. Maybe it was just fog, rain, exhaustion. But a cold shiver ran down his spine. This was no ordinary mist, no ordinary night, and no ordinary passenger. A soft, scraping sound came from the back seat, almost imperceptible at first, then growing steadily louder. His heart jumped, and he risked another glance. The woman's hood had shifted, revealing a pale cheekbone and a faint, impossible smile. He pressed harder on the accelerator, tires sliding slightly on the slick asphalt. The fog seemed to thicken in response, curling around the car, bending reality, distorting the familiar into something uncanny. The GPS voice broke the silence, calm and monotone. "Continue straight for 400 feet. Alex swallowed hard. The street ahead didn't exist. There was only more fog, more shadows, more impossibility. A shiver crawled up his spine. He realized with a cold jolt that he was no longer in control of the car, no longer in control of the road, and no longer in control of the ride itself. Alex's pulse raced as he gripped the wheel. The fog outside had thickened to a near-solid grey, swallowing the road and everything beyond it. He risked a glance in the rear-view mirror. The woman hadn't moved, yet her presence pressed down on him, heavy and suffocating. Her black eyes seemed to pierce straight through him, unblinking, endless. A scraping sound echoed from the back seat again, wet and deliberate. His stomach lurched. The car felt smaller, tighter, as if the walls themselves were closing in. He tried to focus on the GPS, hoping for guidance. Turn right in 200 feet. But the street ahead twisted unnaturally, the lines on the asphalt bending and warping as though reality itself were breaking. The streetlights flickered violently, casting shadows that seemed to crawl along the pavement toward the car. Alex's breath came in short, shallow gasps as he tried to rationalize what he was seeing. The woman leaned slightly forward, her smile widening just a fraction. It wasn't human. Her pale skin glistened with moisture, yet the rest of her remained unnaturally dry, untouchable, unreal. He tried to speak, to break the silence, but no words would come. His throat felt dry, tight, as though the fog itself was choking him. Shapes emerged from the mist, humanoid silhouettes, pale and impossibly still, surrounding the car in every direction. Their black eyes fixed on him, and yet they didn't move. They were already there, always there. The scraping grew louder, accompanied by a whisper so low he could barely hear it. "You can't stop. You can't escape." Alex's hands shook, and a cold realization gripped him. This ride had a destination beyond his comprehension, and his passenger, whatever she was taking him there, whether he wanted to go or not. Alex's hands were trembling as he tried to focus on the road, but the fog outside had thickened into a grey wall, erasing everything familiar. The asphalt ahead seemed to curve in impossible ways, bending like liquid beneath the tires. He risked another glance at the rearview mirror. The woman was still there, motionless, but the oppressive weight of her presence filled the car. Her dark, endless eyes seemed to reach into his mind, probing, testing, claiming. The scraping sound from the back seat had grown louder, more deliberate, like fingernails tracing the upholstery. Alex swallowed hard, his throat dry, and forced his eyes on the headlights barely piercing the mist. Shapes emerged from the fog, twisted humanoid silhouettes, standing impossibly close, yet impossible to reach. They didn't move, didn't breathe, yet Alex felt them pressing against him, folding the world into their will. The GPS voice spoke again, calm and robotic. "Continue straight for 300 feet. Alex's pulse quickened. There was no straight path ahead, only grey mist and shifting shadows that seemed to mock the normal rules of navigation. The woman leaned slightly forward, just enough that her presence filled the cabin entirely. Alex could feel the chill emanating from her, cold and wet, curling through his clothing, sinking into his skin. He tried to force logic into his thoughts. This had to be a trick of exhaustion, of stress, of rain and fog, but the scraping, the shapes, the unnatural smile confirmed a terrifying truth. This was not reality. The road twisted again, impossibly, curving back on itself in ways no normal street could. Each turn seemed to fold time, leaving Alex disoriented, trapped in a loop that had no end. A whisper reached his ears, low, omnipresent, a voice that seemed to echo in his mind. The last stop. It's here. Alex's stomach churned. The realization hit him with ice-cold certainty. Whatever waited at the end of this ride, he was powerless to resist, and his passenger had been guiding him here from the start. Alex's hands shook violently as he gripped the wheel. The fog outside twisted unnaturally, shapes bending and warping in ways his mind refused to comprehend. The woman in the back seat remained perfectly still, yet her presence pressed down like a weight, cold and wet, as if the fog itself had taken human form and settled beside him. A scraping sound echoed again, deliberate and wet, vibrating through the car's frame. Alex flinched, certain it was moving closer, though nothing seemed to shift in the seat. He tried to focus on the GPS, but the voice repeated its monotone instructions. Continue straight for 200 feet. The street ahead no longer existed, replaced by shadows that twisted with a life of their own. The mist thickened, curling around the car like fingers, pressing in, cold and suffocating. The silhouettes outside the fog grew clearer, pale, humanoid forms, black eyes fixed on him, surrounding the vehicle in silent anticipation. Alex's pulse hammered in his ears. Every instinct screamed to escape, yet the car moved forward on its own, gliding over the impossible road, taking him deeper into a place he didn't understand. The woman leaned slightly forward, her impossible smile widening. Her eyes, dark, endless, seemed to penetrate every thought, every memory, as if she were cataloguing his fear. A whisper slithered through the cabin, low and omnipresent. "It's too late to turn back." The words sank into his mind, chilling him to the bone, freezing his thoughts. Alex tried to scream, to demand answers, but his voice caught in his throat. The mist pressed closer, bending the car into the shape of the ride itself, a vehicle carrying him to a destination beyond comprehension. And as the road twisted further into the grey void, Alex realized a horrifying truth. This was no ordinary ride. He had been chosen, and there would be no return from the last stop. Alex's hands trembled on the wheel as the fog thickened into an almost tangible wall. Every familiar landmark had disappeared, replaced by grey, twisting shadows that seemed to pulse with life. He risked a glance in the rearview mirror. The woman sat perfectly still, yet her presence filled the car entirely, pressing against him, cold and unrelenting. Her black eyes followed every movement, endless and unreadable. The scraping sound from the back seat had grown louder, deliberate, wet, almost rhythmic. It echoed through the small cabin, vibrating in his chest and making his bones ache. Alex tried to focus on the GPS, but the voice repeated its monotone directions. Continue straight for 100 feet. The road ahead had vanished entirely, replaced by swirling grey fog, shadows bending and twisting in impossible ways. Shapes emerged from the mist, pale humanoid figures with black voids for eyes. They didn't move, didn't blink, yet he could feel their presence pressing closer, bending the world around him, folding reality into something unrecognizable. The woman leaned slightly forward, and for the first time her voice pierced the silence. Almost there. It was soft, almost tender, yet it sent shivers racing down Alex's spine. He tried to fight the sense of inevitability, pressing harder on the accelerator, but the tires slid over the slick, impossible road. The car moved as if guided by an unseen hand. The mist twisted, forming shapes that mirrored his own reflection. Twisted, pale, impossible. It was as if the road itself had become alive, and he was merely a passenger in its design. Alex's stomach churned as he realized the horrifying truth. He wasn't driving anymore. The ride, the road, the fog, and the passenger, all were leading him somewhere he couldn't comprehend, somewhere he couldn't escape. And in that moment, he understood the last stop wasn't a location, it was a state of being, and once you arrived, there was no leaving. Alex's heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing through the foggy cabin like a drum. The world outside had vanished completely, replaced by swirling grey mist and shapes that seemed to move on their own. He stole a glance at the rearview mirror. The woman leaned forward slightly, her black eyes locked onto his. The unnatural smile on her pale face had widened just enough to make his stomach twist. The scraping sound from the back seat became rhythmic, deliberate, like fingernails on leather. It echoed through the car, vibrating in his chest, crawling into his thoughts. Shapes formed in the mist outside, humanoid, impossibly still, with hollow black eyes. They didn't advance, didn't retreat, but their presence pressed against the car as though the fog itself were alive. Alex's hands shook, trying to steer the car through the impossible road. Every curve bent unnaturally, every straight stretch twisted back on itself, folding the streets into loops that defied all logic. The woman whispered again, soft but omnipresent. "You can't leave. Not yet." Her voice slithered through his mind, chilling him to the core, freezing every thought. Alex tried to call out, to demand answers, but his voice failed him. His breath came in short, shallow gasps, fogging the windshield, mingling with the mist that now seemed to seep inside the car. The GPS repeated its calm instructions, the monotone clashing violently with the terror around him. "Continue straight for 50 feet. But ahead there was only swirling grey, and the shapes were closer, pressing, waiting. A cold realization struck him. The last stop wasn't a place on a map. It wasn't a street, a house, or a building. It was this, the ride itself, the fog, the woman, the shapes, all converging into a single, inevitable destination. Alex's pulse thundered. There was no escape. The road, the mist, the passenger, they had already claimed him, guiding him into something he could not see, something he could not resist. Alex's hands were shaking violently on the wheel. The fog outside had thickened into a nearly solid grey, swallowing every hint of light and distorting the familiar streets into something unrecognizable. He stole a glance in the rearview mirror. The woman remained motionless, yet her presence pressed down like a heavy weight, cold and damp, filling the entire car. Her endless black eyes seemed to look into him, through him, past him. The scraping sound from the back seat had grown louder, deliberate, wet, and rhythmic. Each echo vibrated through his chest, rattling his bones and making his thoughts splinter into panic. Shapes formed in the fog outside, pale, humanoid silhouettes with empty black eyes. They didn't move, but they surrounded the car, folding reality around them, bending the streets and shadows into impossible patterns. The GPS voice broke the suffocating silence. "You have arrived at your destination." Alex swallowed hard, looking ahead. There was nothing but fog, shadows and shapes, yet the monotone instruction felt horrifyingly true. The woman leaned slightly forward and for the first time spoke with a soft, chilling tone. "This is it." The words crawled under his skin, freezing his thoughts and his blood. Alex's pulse raced uncontrollably. The tires slid slightly over the slick, impossible road, yet the car moved as if guided by an unseen hand, drawn toward an end he could neither see nor understand. The mist seemed to press against him from all sides, curling inside the car, chilling him to the bone. The scraping continued, now joined by whispers he couldn't make out, but felt in the marrow of his spine. He realized with bone-deep terror that the last stop wasn't a place, it was the ride itself. The fog, the passenger, the impossible road, they were all one, and they had claimed him entirely. Alex's breath came in ragged gasps. He understood now. The ride would never end, the passenger would never leave, and the last stop was where he had already arrived, trapped in a nightmare that had no escape. Alex's hands shook violently on the wheel. The fog outside had become almost tangible, curling around the car like living fingers, erasing the streets and folding the world into grey, impossible shapes. He stole a glance at the rearview mirror. The woman's pale face was inches from his, her black eyes endless and unreadable, her impossible smile widening slowly. The scraping from the back seat grew louder, deliberate, rhythmic. Each sound reverberated through the car, vibrating in his bones, sending chills racing along his spine. Shapes emerged in the fog, tall, pale, humanoid figures with hollow black eyes. They didn't move toward him, yet he felt them pressing closer, bending the space around him, warping reality itself. Alex's pulse thundered. His mind screamed for escape, but the tires skidded slightly on the slick, impossible road. The car moved on its own, guided by some unseen force, deeper into the mist. The woman leaned forward slightly, her voice soft, cold, and intimate. "It's almost time." The words crawled under his skin, freezing his thoughts and turning his fear into raw, helpless terror. He risked another look at the shapes outside. They were closer now, crowding the fog, surrounding the car in every direction, and yet impossibly still, as if reality itself had bent to contain them. Alex realized, with a growing chill in his bones, that he had never been driving at all. The ride, the car, the road, and the passenger, they were all controlling him, guiding him toward a destination beyond comprehension. The GPS repeated its monotone voice. "You have arrived at your destination." But ahead there was nothing but endless fog and the presence of countless dark shapes waiting. And in that moment, Alex understood the truth. The last stop was not a place. It was a state of being, a nightmare he could not wake from, a ride he could never leave, and a passenger who would never let him go. Alex's hands were trembling violently on the wheel. The fog outside had swallowed everything. The streets, the streetlights, even the familiar hum of the city. Only grey, endless nothingness remained. He stole a glance in the rearview mirror. The woman's pale face was inches from his, her black, endless eyes locking onto his with an intensity that made his chest tighten. Her impossible smile promised a horror beyond understanding. The scraping from the back seat had grown deafening, wet and deliberate, echoing through the car, vibrating in his bones, crawling into his very thoughts. Shapes formed in the fog outside, countless pale humanoid silhouettes with hollow black eyes. They didn't move, they didn't need to. Their presence pressed on the car, bending the world into their will, surrounding him in a nightmare that felt inescapable. The GPS voice repeated its monotone instructions. "You have arrived at your destination." But ahead there was nothing but grey mist, no street, no buildings, only the oppressive, watching fog. The woman leaned forward fully, her voice soft, chilling. "Welcome to the last stop." Her words slithered under Alex's skin, freezing his mind, wrapping him in terror. Alex tried to scream, tried to demand answers, but no sound came. The car moved as if driven by an unseen force, following a path that didn't exist, through a world that had never existed, into a reality that had never been his. The mist pressed inside the car, curling around him like living smoke, chilling his skin and filling his lungs. The scraping and whispers intensified, a chorus of the impossible waiting just beyond his perception. Alex realized with a cold certainty that turned his blood to ice, he was no longer in control. He had never been in control. The ride, the fog, the passenger, and the shapes outside, all had claimed him, guiding him into a place beyond escape. And as the car glided into the grey void, Alex understood the final horrifying truth. The last stop wasn't a location, a street, or a building. It was a state of being, a ride into eternal terror, and he would never leave. And there you have it, 6 terrifying Uber rides that prove sometimes the people, or things, you pick up aren't what they seem. Remember, every time you get into a car at night, the shadows could be watching, and the last stop might not be the one you expect. If you enjoyed these stories, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a new nightmare. Drop a comment below and let us know. Which ride scared you the most, and if you've ever had a ride that felt just a little too strange, share it with us. Thanks for listening. Stay safe out there. And remember, some rides never really end.